It's Thursday here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. The Steelers reported on Wednesday. I want to talk about the biggest points that happened on the day, including Najee Harris finally speaking to the media about not getting his fifth-year extension. We also talked to Russell Wilson, several other players, and Troy Fautanu. We'll go over all of that on today's episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. GameTime is the app you need to download today. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off on your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. We'll have more on them later. All right, Steelers fans, let's get into a few things here. First, Steelers did report to camp. Also, as you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm in a little bit of a different environment. I'm recording from St. Vincent College right now. Just kind of had to figure out my own space, and because of that, the audio quality is not as normally as what it would usually be, because StreamYard's giving me some hard times here at their app. But I wanted to still bring you guys a show and put it together as soon as I could after practice to kind of get you like the live feel of what I've gotten from just talking to players. We talked to Mike Tomlin actually just minutes before I recorded this, but I'll focus more on what the players had to say, and especially Najee Harris, because as you know, Najee Harris did not speak to the media either during OTAs or minicamp, and that's been since he did not get his fifth-year extension from the team. So this was the first chance that we've had a chance to talk to him, and it was kind of interesting hearing from him in a few different respects. One, addressing it and how he addressed it, but also two, and how it seems to not have changed his approach. You know, Najee Harris, when you think of NFL players that normally don't get the contract that they're looking for or get the fifth-year extension, there's a bit of pushback. There's they want us to say, hey, I deserve more, I deserve this. Najee Harris, it seems to be more focused on just doing what's in front of him and being as good as he can with this upcoming season. But I'll let you listen to how Najee Harris handled questions today when we got a chance to talk to him, and this was how he sounded when he talked about his contract. Here's Najee Harris.
Did they give you an explanation or say anything to you or talk to you about it?
Like explanation why they didn't?
Yeah. Why they didn't pick up the option?
Let me think. It was they don't know where the offense is headed.
Pardon?
That was it. That's not worth it.
Does that give you more motivation going into this year to
No, I
show,
already have
hey,
motivation.
and what is that motivation?
I don't like to say I just have motivation. I don't need somebody to tell me what I can and can't do. That doesn't motivate me or anything. So I mean, like I already have my motivation since I was a kid. It's nothing new to me. I've been in this spotlight, in this position pretty much all my life, ever since I was a kid. So, I mean, this is nothing new, just more cameras and interviews and questions.
Now, would it be your desire to stay here long term?
Yeah, most definitely. I like here in Pittsburgh. I like Coach T, Mr. Rooney, Omar, even Kevin Colbert when he was here. It's a good city. Obviously, the people here are nice and are welcoming. But it's a business. This isn't this comes and goes in your life. Like I said, I've been around this stuff all my life. And what I always take from it is I've always been in the driver's seat of this, and God's been steering it. And wherever He stops the cars, wherever I'm working at, and if it's here or somewhere else, by all means, I'm going to do everything I can for that team. And that's just the mindset you got to have with this sport.
You mentioned the
So first, want to address something, because I know some of you might have not been able to hear exactly what he said when he was asked about the contract situation, what the Steelers said, because he also did pause there for a bit. To quote, he did say because the Steelers weren't sure about the direction of their offense. Now, what does that mean? I think that means a few things. One, as we've talked about here, the Steelers have talked about they want to be able to run the football. They want to be able to use play action and be this physically dominant team. But I think part of it is they need to see it come to fruition. And I think it's the open-mindedness the Steelers front office and coaching staff has right now about the reality that there's a chance that the initial plans aren't what yield the best results on offense. They've got Russell Wilson, a guy who's been a Super Bowl champion, who's led some offenses and has played very efficiently in the NFL. There's a chance that the passing offense ignites. I'm not saying that that's the most likely thing to happen or that it's even going to happen. But I think what the Steelers are in a position for is that, like, they know that in the coming years, they're going to need to continue to change, as every NFL team does. But part of that means not locking themselves into contracts that they're not sure about. And as I've said before, I think Najee Harris was worth a fifth-year option, but maybe part of this is because they're just not sure how much of the hard running type of football to a football offense that they want to be part of the future if it doesn't work out this year. Because they've made these investments in Broderick Jones and Troy Fautanu and Zach Frazier, and they brought in a guy in Arthur Smith he's been an offensive coordinator for a team that's rushed really well. In fact, his 2 years of being an offensive coordinator are the two best years of Derrick Henry's career rushing wise. So it's clear that's the intent, but I think the Steelers are kind of acknowledging, look, intent is good, but you also need to be prepared for what happens when the intent doesn't work out in your favor and you have to go with something else. And we've seen that before, right? I mean, the Steelers had to kind of be flexible last year when the plan, it looked initially like they were going to be more of a running team. Then Kenny Pickett looked really good in the preseason. They came out trying to throw the ball a bit more. That didn't work out. And eventually later in the season, they got back to running the football, and that played a big role in them being a better football team towards the end of the season, including when Kenny Pickett wasn't the quarterback and it was Mason Rudolph. So I think part of this is Najee Harris is more so, and he also said, like, he was down for like a day or two when he didn't get his fifth-year extension, but he realized, like, hey, you know what, I'm going to get mine. He said he loves the team. He loves Mike Tom and Omar Khan. Said he even loved Kevin Colbert, the previous GM, and he loves the city. He thinks that the big thing is that he recognizes football's a business, and part of business is doing what's best for yourself. That's what organizations are going to do, and that's what players are going to do. And I think that's where Najee Harris still is in this conversation. So I wanted to lead off with this because this was one of the most unanswered things that we had all spring and summer for this year, was what's going on with Najee Harris, because we weren't sure what happened when the fifth-year extension wasn't picked up. When it's clear he's not going to hold in. He even kind of acknowledged that, like, he kind of doesn't have the leverage for it for right now with the way running backs are perceived. But I think it's a sign that Najee Harris is going to come to work. He's going to come to be ready. And I asked him at one point if he feels like this is the best situation that he's been in since he's been with the Steelers, with Arthur Smith, the offensive line that's been there, Russell Wilson being his quarterback. And he kind of thought about it. He shrugged up. He said, we'll see. Like, he kind of wanted to, I think the whole point is both sides are trying to figure each other out right now in the Steelers and Najee Harris as far as what's going to work for them. And I think that's a big part of this season, right? Is if this offense works the way that they are envisioning it with Arthur Smith and his emphasis of being a power running football team, then Najee Harris, and if he's part of that, both are going to eat and both are going to be happy, and maybe they find a resolution. But if it doesn't, I think both sides are kind of looking to what's the next step after this year. The Steelers definitely without taking his fifth-year option, and Najee Harris kind of setting himself up to be like, hey, I need to be prepared to move wherever. And he kind of also brought that up with saying that he's willing to play wherever he has to play in his career. But all that to say, I think Najee Harris, it seems like he's at least put behind the concerns about why he did or didn't get the fifth-year extension. The main focus for him right now is going to be playing better football and being part of a better offense that the Steelers hope to be putting together. But I want to talk more about that better offense because we also talked to Russell Wilson a bit, and I thought he had some interesting responses to questions we had as the players reported on Wednesday. We'll talk more about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, we'll remind you this show is brought to you by GameTime. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. In fact, it should be easy with GameTime, where you can book tickets to your favorite sporting events and so much more. It's summertime, which means it's baseball season, so you can get all the tickets that you want to your favorite ball clubs playing all across the country. Whether you're here in Pittsburgh and you want to see rookie phenom Paul Skeens pitch on the mound for the Pirates, or you're in Los Angeles and you want to watch Shohei Ohtani be a world sensation for the Dodgers, GameTime has got you tickets for wherever you go. Just go on the GameTime app right now. It's fast and easy way to buy tickets for all your sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. Even if it's buying tickets up to the last minute, GameTime can even save you up to 60% off when you buy tickets at the last minute for events. Plus, the best price guarantee that GameTime offers is the best out there. You can say when you get the best price, if you find a price somewhere else that's better than GameTime in the same section in a row for the event that you got through GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference of those prices. Snag the tickets without the stress with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL NFL for $20 off your first purchase, or go to their website, GameTime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue talking about the Steelers in today's episode and report day. Now, again, the thing about report day, and I'm going to say this, just kind of getting back to, kind of just bringing back the curtain here as far as, people who get to go attend practices and games and get credentialed. Report day is kind of just the day when everyone's kind of getting in. Like when you try to ask Mike Tomlin any deep question, he's like, guys, we just got here. And it's even going to be that like for the first 2 days of practice too. Everyone's kind of feeling things out. Everyone's kind of getting a sense of things. So it's not it's not the day that you're going to get the most in-depth responses for anything. But like anything else, and like we like to do here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, which comes to you every single day, Monday through Friday, and tries to give you a daily catalog of what's going on with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think a big part of what's good is taking notes of what happens and adding those notes up. And I think that stuff like what Najee Harris said, that's something to add up for how this season goes, whether it goes poorly or very well for Najee Harris. It's something to remember. But also for Russell Wilson, who's in a very unique position in Steelers history as far as a veteran quarterback with a Super Bowl champion veteran quarterback with lots of success in his career, coming to the Steelers after being ousted by his previous team. There's a lot of different things to look at there. But I want to get you a chance to listen to Russell Wilson. And when I wanted to ask him how he wanted to prepare, because when he got out of his car right in front of the media and first walked into the Steelers dorm, he had his playbook in hand. He looked ready to go. He was going to talk to media right away, and they said like, oh, he'll come back. He came back and he talked to us for several minutes and gave us very, very I think thought out answers to all the different questions. I wanted to ask him about preparation, because a big part of what the Steelers need is they need a quarterback who is prepared, who is good at reading the field, good at understanding the offense, and can balance everything all around and make good decisions. That's the big thing. So how has he prepared for that? When I asked him that question, here's what Russell Wilson said when he reported for Steelers training camp.
What work do you put in to be prepared so that you guys can hit the ground running with everyone's getting a new playbook and everything?
It's always about, trying to understand the offense in a full capacity. What's up, TJ? Always trying to understand the offense in a full capacity. Not just me, but everybody. We're all included here, and everybody having a full understanding of what we're trying to accomplish. We definitely have that. I think Coach Arthur Smith's done a great job of making sure that everybody's on the same page, from coaches to players and everything else. And so now being away for a little bit, all of us, now we come back and we have a head start, we feel like, from how much we grew, I think, in the offseason into where we are right now. And so, at the end of the day, though, we still got to work for it. It takes that extra studying time late at night. It takes to open up the playbook right before you go to bed, that extra 30 minutes. It takes bringing out your yellow and blue highlighter and your orange highlighter, and just getting, taking your notes the way you need to take your notes, asking the right questions. It's all of that part of it, of learning, and it's just like we're in school all over again.
Was that your playbook you were carrying in when you got out?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, this playbook. Everybody's digital now. Nowadays, I do a mixture, but I'm old school. I've got to have the paper and pen and take my notes every day, but also do the digital thing too. So I do both.
Your first thoughts of the dorm and.
So again, a few things there. One, you saw Russell Wilson confirm it was his playbook, because we were not sure if it was just a binder of things. Who knows? But I thought it was interesting, and it kind of goes back to why I think Russell Wilson is very important for the future of this team and especially this offense, even if it's just for this season. When you hear him talk about the preparation and getting everyone together, Russell Wilson, I don't think he's going to be some superstar for the Steelers, but I do think he's going to be a guy that can help everyone understand the direction that everyone's supposed to be heading in. And that's something that the Steelers didn't have last season. We talked about these guys. We talked to these guys even when they were, I think it was 8-5 at one point, or 7-5, or whatever it was, before they hit that 3-game losing streak, and everyone was concerned if they would make the playoffs or not at that point. But even before then, I remember asking the Steelers, what's the identity of this offense, and they were like, I don't know, because they didn't have a direction and they didn't have a leader who could keep them focused in the right direction. And I know offensive coordinator plays a big role in that too, and that's why we've talked a lot about Arthur Smith. But again, if you listen to how Russell Wilson talks, how he thinks, even in that moment where TJ Watt, who come by says what's up to him, he says what's up to TJ. Like, Russell Wilson makes it a point to get to know his teammates. I think he's very mindful of relationships, of building relationships and working together. One thing, Najee Harris acknowledged, during his talks, later in his talks, was that he did get to work out with Russell Wilson, even for just a few hours during the break between mini camp and training camp. But this is going to be, I think, a big part of Russell Wilson's job. Isn't just throwing the football or reading the defense. It's also reading your teammates and understanding them and getting everyone on the same page and helping the Steelers get back on the kind of the better side of playing consistent football and everyone kind of being on the same page in the offense, and rebuilding a culture that has been non-existent really for the past few years, especially since really the time of the last major offensive players kind of being aging out of the team, like Marquise Pouncey, David DeCastro, and of course Ben Roethlisberger. And I think that's where Russell Wilson, and I think that's really interesting to hear him talk about how he's going to prepare. And again, it's the first day. I'm sure he's done a lot of reading of the playbook. He talked about his highlighters and how he likes to work and still use a physical playbook, and that's how he kind of it works to improve on things. But I also think it's going to be really interesting to see how does he play in these practices when they do 7 shots. How does he challenge the Steelers defense that's going to be trying to get after him, and how does he respond when they beat him? Because that was part of it. Was if you remember a few years ago, the Steelers defense used to do a dance during training camp. Whenever they got a turnover, they would throw the ball way up in the air and they would pretend like they were shooting it like it was skeet and stuff like that. And that was kind of like a theme for them, and they did it a lot during that training camp because the offense was just terrible. But that was kind of something that the Steelers offense didn't like. But how does Russell Wilson respond when he does make a turnover in those situations? And how does he fight back? One thing that happened during OTAs and minicamp was the offense got to do some celebrating. And it wasn't often that we got to see that during past minicamps before, or no, minicamps, excuse me, past training camps in the past couple of years. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how Russell Wilson continue. Like, we've seen him say all the right things and do all the right things as far as being a player leading into training camp, but when it's on and the sun is beating you down at Latrobe at St. Vincent College, and you're trying to get things right, and you're working with a very young offense, and you're working against a defense that's got the best player in the world in TJ Watt, that's got other great players like Alex Highsmith, like Minkah Fitzpatrick. They've added Patrick Queen, Cam Hayward, and then young guys like Joey Porter. There's going to be a lot of pressure to deliver, and I think that's where it's going to be really interesting to see how Russell Wilson handles throughout this training camp. And if he pulls through this training camp and this offense feels like it's more together, like they're ready to tackle things, and they go into the season starting strong, that's going to be the first time we've seen that in a very long time in the Steelers organization, maybe even since before the pandemic. If you look at how the offense has been to start the past several seasons. So I wanted to talk about that, but I also want to talk about, of course, one of the rookies, and that's Troy Fautanu. We got a chance to talk to him as well. We'll talk about what Troy Fautanu said next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast here at St. Vincent College at Steelers training camp after the Steelers have reported on day one. We'll talk about that in a minute here. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, we'll remind you this show is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, and LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the price that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our episode talking with you here. So let's get into other guys that reported in. And I talked to TJ Watt. We talked to Landon Roberts. Landon Roberts definitely had the best fit of training camp. He came in with just a cowboy hat and overalls, and everyone was kind of like, what's going on there? And he's like, I'm from Texas. This is what we do. So that was kind of funny. But I wanted to talk about one of the other talking points that we've really had throughout since the end of the NFL draft, and that's the Steelers' first-round pick, Troy Fautanu. If you remember, he was drafted as a major offensive tackle, one of the top tackles that was both rated nationally and that we both rated here on this Locked On Steelers podcast going into the first night of the draft. When the Steelers got him, this was a guy who played left tackle at Washington, but it was left tackle for a left-handed quarterback, and so there was speculation, would he be the right tackle? And he kind of got into that a little bit because I also wanted to ask him about how he's been preparing for his first training camp and things that he focused on. And when he talked about that, he talked about some of the things that he was doing, but he also talked about what one thing that he worked on, and that was making sure that he could flip from left to right and the footwork that's involved with it. Without further ado, here's Troy Fautanu when he reported to Steelers training camp when I got a chance to talk to him.
Mini camp till now, have you taken anything to bring here to help yourself improve? Have you learned anything that quickly?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, reps. That's the biggest thing for me. Just getting reps against NFL caliber guys, and going against guys like we have on the edge is going to help only make me better. You have elite talent, on the edge, especially on this team with TJ and Alex and Nick and a bunch of those guys. So I'm just ready to treat every day like a game day, man. That's the mindset I've come into to camp with, and just making sure that I'm getting better every single day.
Did
So
you focus on anything between OTAs and now that you want to go get ready for this? Is there anything specific that you did to prepare?
I mean, just honing in on my craft, man. Just continuously getting reps at whatever I need to work on. Like I said before, like the difference between playing left and right is just switching up the footwork. And that may sound easier than it is, but yeah, it is difficult. But I know it'll come with time, so I'm just ready to take on the challenge.
So this is another point about switching from left to right when you talk about it with Troy Fautanu, and that he's right. It sounds like it could be simple, but we've seen it not be. The Steelers had a problem flipping, Kevin Dotson from left to right at the guard position, and to be honest, the guard position I think is less complicated when it comes to flipping from left to right than offensive tackle, because tackles have to do so much more in pass protection, especially when they're dealing with edge rushers, whereas guards are on the interior and have more protection around them, so that they're not, that's why tackles in the more prime position to be selected and to be invested into in the NFL these days. So there's a lot of that I think plays a factor. But I also think what plays a factor is Troy Fautanu. One of the reasons that they got this guy was I think that, from all the things that I've read, when I've listened to, when I talked to him at the combine, when I talked to him, when after the Steelers drafted him, this guy seems like a thinking man when it comes to football. He's not a guy that's overly reliant on just his physical skills. He is applying himself day in and day out to try to understand what he needs to do to get there. And he also seems very humble about doing so. He doesn't seem like he has a bit of a confidence, like he wants to go prove himself, like he's ready to prove himself, but he also wants to prove himself and knows that he still has to. And I think that that's a big factor for what the Steelers need, because remember, a big factor with Troy Fautanu and what the Steelers want to achieve there is if he flips from left to right, that allows Broderick Jones to get to left tackle, which was his natural position in college, and which is what prototypically he's built better to be for, even though he is was a really good run blocker last year, not as good of a pass protector. But I think that that's where Broderick Jones has to get better. He has to get better in his footwork, his hand placement, as far as how he attacks people that are coming in to keep them out of his frame. But both of those guys need to prove that they're ready for those things if Dan Moore Jr. is going to be the guy that loses his spot. And Dan Moore Jr., saw him coming into camp. By the way, Mike Tomlin did say everyone reported to camp. Everyone's fine. Cole Holcomb, Dean Lowry are on the PUP list. I think Cordell Patterson's kind of like day-to-day with not a hamstring, but some sort of light injury. But looking at guys like Dan Moore Jr. is still the presumptive starter on this offensive line until someone says otherwise. And I know that, Troy Fautanu, he's the guy that you want to start at right tackle, and Broderick Jones is the guy you want to start at left tackle. But right now, I think it's still going to be about everyone has to go out and prove it. And as I've said before, these first couple of days of practice, first really, 4 days of practice, these aren't going to be the days that those get proven. In fact, I think the first day in pads is Tuesday. Or next Tuesday. So just under a week from today. But I think that's where everyone kind of has to realize that the Steelers are at when it comes to how they're handling this season, especially in the offensive line. They have like they're handling with Najee Harris's contract, like they're handling with everything else. They're being very open minded to what could be the best situation and not locking themselves in or backing themselves into a corner. It was funny. I mean, Mike Tomlin kind of joked about that during his press conference when asked about what's going to be the rep allocation of Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, and he's like, I'm not painting myself into a corner. What you think I am? A rookie at this, and so he kind of knows what the deal is there. But that's where I think it could be also very interesting is that they're not painting themselves into a corner during OTAs and minicamp and training camp about who's going to be where on this offensive line either. And if you remember, during the spring and the summer when we got to talk to them, Mike Tomlin never specifically said where that he would, where Broderick Jones would line up or Troy Fautanu would line up. He has acknowledged in the past that Dan Moore Jr. couldn't play right tackle. That's something he did acknowledge, last season. But then when that was brought up again, and we talked about that with Jim Wexell, earlier this offseason, Jim Wexell said, we asked him about it, and then Mike Tomlin pretended he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I think part of that is just an acknowledgement that's like, hey, you got to be prepared for everything, and the Steelers are trying to be that. But part of that is just being open-minded. And I think that's one thing you're seeing from Russell Wilson to Najee Harris to even Troy Fautanu and Broderick Jones. So when it comes to what Fautanu is going to be able to do as far as footwork, as far as hand placement, that's something that I'm going to be watching very closely when I finally get a chance to see what he does. Even when the pads are off, like, how smooth does he look? How comfortable does he look when he lines up on the right side versus the left and what he's able to do? Because, on the flip side, the thing about it defensively, if you remember the first year TJ Watt came in the league, he played on the right side of the defense, and that was something that he wasn't as comfortable with doing. And then in the second year, he flipped to the left side, and then he was busting people up because that's where the side that he was used to rushing from, and that was where he felt more comfortable deploying himself in the defense with his hand moves, his footwork, and everything like that. And so that's going to be a key element here. And that's, again, why I'm trying to remind everyone as you're getting ready to see training camp and follow training camp, and we'll have updates every day about training camp. These are going to be the things that I think that are that you want to pay the most attention to, whether it's the running back, the quarterback, but also the first round pick offensive tackle and where he fits into the offense, along with last year's first round pick offensive tackle. I think there's a lot of potential here for this Steelers team and for the Steelers' future core if these two offensive tackles are both big hits for Omar Khan in this front offense. If both Jones and Fautanu become studs at tackle, I think it sets a great tone for what the future could be, especially if this team wants to run the football, but also especially if the Steelers in the near future strike really well at quarterback. You'll have both sides of that quarterback protected very well because you'll have two great offensive tackles. That's why it's important to keep track of these things, and that's why we'll continue to keep track of these things here at the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday. Break it down your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Back tomorrow when we see our first official Steelers training camp practice right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.